It's nice to see Mary Rubino in the room. Mary is from the family that was the named donor to the Loyola Endowed Professorship of Italian American. And some of us in the room, a lot of us in the room, worked real hard on that project almost 10 years ago now. And we're pleased to know that it's still running, and that we're pleased to have some folks sponsored this time by the holder of that professorship, Nancy Caronia. Nancy, and welcome to Casa Italia, Nancy.
Grazie.
This is your first appearance. Okay, nice to see you here. Nancy will be the MC for the program part of it, and I'm just here to do a preliminary introduction to Nancy, and to say that we are very proud to have the Loyola Professorship, and we're proud to have you here, and we wish you great success, and your success is our success for the future, and that Casa Italia is at your disposal to co-sponsor things, whatever you like, we'll try to accommodate. And welcome here from the bottom of our hearts. I have only one heart. That's okay.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, maybe but yes, we're here. If you want to do outreach to the community, we're here. So without further ado, Professor Nancy Caronia of the English Department at Loyola University Chicago.
Grazie, Dominic. Thank you, everybody. Grazie. Thank you for being here this morning. I want to thank you for having Loyola University and me co-sponsor today's Sabato Culturale here at Casa Italia. I'm happy that after this program, we're going to get to see more of your facilities, and I'm happy to meet so many of you interested not only in preserving your families and cities' histories, but also in continuing to learn about the Italian American experience. I want to begin by saying that in a chapter I co-wrote with Edvige Giunta for a forthcoming volume about the impact of Helen Barolini's The Dream Book, Eddie and I discuss how important it has been to grow a community of women writers of Italian descent in the United States, as well as a readership hungry for their words. This tradition began with Barolini's editorship for The Dream Book, which was published in 1985. She brought together 56 Italian American women writers, many who did not know each other at the time, and others no one had realized were of Italian descent because they got married and erased their maiden names, or they changed their names, like Frances Winmore, whose name was Frances Vinciguerra, and changed her name to Winmore in order to publish in the American publishing industry. This semester, I'm teaching 2 courses, but I want to talk about one. I'm teaching an upper-level undergraduate literature course on the birth and development of an Italian-American women's literary tradition. Even though most of these undergraduates are not Italian-American, they have felt deeply the stories they are reading this semester. Many have immigrant parents and grandparents from Poland, Russia, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. There are other students who are first-generation college students, and others still who must work to support their families while attending school full-time. We began the semester, of course, with Barolini's landmark anthology and discussed the process of how women writers might gain agency and autonomy over their writing processes and publication. They are English majors, so they were happy to read Barolini's dense theoretical introduction to understand how it was in Barolini's question, why were Italian-American women writers not heard? Now, this is back in 1985, and I would say that's changed, but back in 1985, that's a real question. They understood Barolini's discussion of historical and social reasons why women were silenced or might have silenced themselves, but they especially embraced the idea of the internal and external barriers that might keep a woman of Italian descent in the United States from writing in the early and mid-20th century. In our discussion, they recognized some of their own trepidations about the writing process. They were especially moved by Barolini's recounting of then-Senator Robert Torricelli's anecdote of a childhood experience when he raised his hand in school after a teacher told his class that he was the only one whose ancestors were not from Europe. "Excuse me," the young Torricelli said, "Italy is in Europe." To which the teacher replied, "Only technically." The students recognized in that language the violence against a people that others see as not quite fully human, as subhuman. Their parents, their grandparents, their neighbors, even they sometimes face those kinds of prejudices and discriminations today. They had compassion for these writers and their ancestors. They felt their own limitations in the land of the American dream. In addition to Barolini's introduction, we started this semester by reading pieces from the anthology in nonfiction, memoir, fiction, and poetry, including Chicago native Tina DeRosa's paper Fish, which we read in its entirety later in the semester, and an excerpt from Rosa, The Life of an Italian Immigrant, a told-to memoir piece revised and edited by the well-known social worker, writer, and children's book illustrator, Mary Hall Etz. This piece is a fictionalized retelling of the life of Inez Cassatore, who was born in 1866 or 1867 and died in 1943. She was also known by the name Rosa Cassatore, and Hall Etz, for the purpose of this volume, renamed her Rosa Cavaliere. Born in the Lombardy region of northern Italy, Inez Rosa was forced into an abusive marriage at 14 years of age. The couple immigrated to the United States, where her husband wanted her to run a brothel. She refused, left him, and moved to Chicago. She remarried a Tuscan immigrant and became a cleaning woman for the Chicago Commons until her death in 1943. Her story is an important part of Chicago history, an important part of immigrant history, and an important part of an Italian American women's literary tradition. My students were struck by how stalwart and positive Rosa sounded in this piece, how she never complained, how she minimized the negative things that happened, including almost dying completely alone in childbirth. And then they discussed how Hall Etz filtered Rosa's story for an audience that Hall Etz wanted to be sympathetic to immigrants. We related this narrative revision to the way that slave narratives from the 19th century, works like Harriet Jacobs' Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl, were consciously written to convince white Americans to end slavery. As W.E.B. Du Bois said, those works often dropped the veil on the most upsetting incidents to not upset white people with how badly enslaved people were treated. To get their assistance, these narratives had to pull back on what had happened to the protagonists. And so my students understood that Rosa Cavaliere's story, as Hall Etz renamed her, was measured for an audience that needed to see immigrants as full human beings, to see a hard-working immigrant woman who suffered the death of a child, who made do under extreme poverty, who had a husband who was abusive and made her do unspeakable things which she courageously refused to do. They needed to see how she survived on her own, almost dying alone with her son in childbirth, and how hard she worked and worked and worked, and how much she loved working at the Chicago Commons and never complained. Because that was the only story of an immigrant that could make sense. That was the only story that could show an immigrant as a full human being, to be a model minority, to never make a mistake, to be perfect, to never have a negative emotion. She needed not to be a human being, but a human perfect, an impossibility under any circumstance, but most especially for a young girl. Remember, she was 14 when she married and came to L'America, alone in a new country. That anything survives of Rosa's story is a miracle. That my students understood that there were gaps and absences in the telling because Rosa could not be fully in control of her own narrative was their first step in understanding how a tradition might be birthed. That they recognized that Rosa did what she had to do because although Hall Etz revised Rosa's story, it is just as likely that Rosa purposefully shared what she knew would be accepted in order for not only her story to be told, but so that the story of Italian immigrant women would not be completely forgotten. could not be completely erased. I bring up the history of Rosa, the life of an Italian immigrant, and Barolini's The Dream Book because Barolini too did what she needed to do. Her anthology was born due to her own sense of feeling ignored and erased. She had written Umbertina, a multi-generational novel about a Calabrian immigrant woman and her daughters and granddaughters. First published in 1979, it's a complicated novel that reveals the dislocation that daughters and granddaughters embody as they struggle to discover what it means to be Italian American in the United States. The novel, for a variety of reasons, did not receive a great deal of publicity and almost disappeared. Barolini wanted to know where other women of Italian descent like her were and why she didn't know them. She undertook the editorial work of placing these 56 women together in the Dream Book after the work of a detective to find these women, part as an act of finding connection and partly to see if she could gather an audience for her own novel. What she did not set out to do, but she did do, was establish an Italian American women's literary tradition. In the 40 years since the Dream Book was published, as Addio Junta and I document in our chapter for the Barolini volume, there have been numerous anthologies focused on Italian American women writers. Groups have gathered and supported one another and created events together. Some of the writers in the Dream Book helped this tradition to grow, especially the Virginia Woolf scholar and memoirist Louise DeSalvo, and the poet and director of the Patterson Literary Review, Maria Naziati Gillen. These women writers published numerous anthologies and created multiple opportunities for Italian American writers, not just women. I have a hard time thinking about DeSalvo's passing almost 8 years now, and that Gillen is retiring from her position as the director of the Poetry Center in Passaic County, a position she has held since 1979. A breathtaking stint where she has worked tirelessly to promote, assist, and publish writers of all racial, ethnic, and gender communities, but most especially her work on making sure Italian American writers had a home for their work. If Barolini was the Italian American godmother to Italian American women's writing, Gillen has been all marginalized writers' angel on earth. Coming here today to talk about Italian American literature, especially since I'm here with Christina Marrocco and Mark DiPaolo, I am reminded that a new generation picks up the work and strengthens the tradition, a tradition that has moved beyond simplistic tales of immigration to complicated narratives of belonging. I want to point out 2 important contributions in the last 10 years. Michelle Messina Reale founded the online journal Ovunque Siamo in 2017, and today also has Ovunque Siamo Press, which published Christina's Addio Love Monster, which received the Best Book Award from Chicago Writers Association in 2022. And Mark, with Anthony Leoy, co-edited a newly released and groundbreaking anthology, Italian American Fantastica, fantasy, horror, and science fiction from Pinocchio to Star Trek, which makes space for Italian American writers who focus on science fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, and horror, genres that are minimized and ignored in mainstream writing circles and almost completely forgotten about until now in Italian American studies. We are fortunate that they said yes to my invitation today to read and talk with us all. I want to return briefly to my undergraduate students. What these students are learning is that it takes more than a few individuals finding singular publication to make a tradition, to create a history that has a lineage and can continue on when these original writers are gone. Writers, although they write in solitude, need a community of other writers, of publishers, editors, scholars, and readers. As I said before, these students are diverse, and that diversity makes for a hungry bunch, the way Italian immigrants were hungry, not for riches, but for a welcoming and safe home with a strong and loving community. Hungry for knowledge that makes sense of their place in the world. Hungry to be heard and seen for who they are, and not as someone else would have them be. I have been impressed with their deep and close reading of the texts I've shared with them. This week we are reading Christina's novel, and they just are gobbling it up and love Giuseppa and Gatto Fred and all the characters and the construction of Mulberry Park. You know, they're just really loving it. And in 2 weeks she's going to come to them with they're going to come with their questions for her as she visits us over Zoom. This coming week, we'll kick off National Poetry Month with a reading of Italian American poets, followed by an open mic where anyone who comes can share their writing. I've gotten refreshments, a hummus bar and a fruit plate, because most of them are health conscious. But really, it's an opportunity for them to show off what they know and to share what they've been doing in and outside the classroom, not only for each other, but also for their friends, their peers, and faculty across campus. I dwell on this aspect of my position because this component is some of how a literary tradition grows. Young people must be engaged with literature that speaks to them and challenges them. Sometimes these two aspects meet, as I believe they are in our course on an Italian American women's literary tradition. I'm honored to say that 4 students applied for the undergraduate summer research experience on translating oral histories that Dominic Candeloro did as part of his continued work that began with an NEH grant in the early 1980s. I will have 1 student, I'm trying to get a second one, dedicated to this project for a month, who will assist in the translation of the oral histories that remain. We just need to know where the tapes are, Dominic. And then next summer, I hope to create a microsite that will live on the Loyola University library page. It will assist scholars, students, and anyone interested in these Chicago area oral histories in finding where the transcripts are loaded, where the original tapes are located, and also give a history of how these oral histories were gathered and came to be, connecting the oral histories to the events, lectures, interviews that were done in service to these oral histories. You know, I want to say something. In Italian American studies, there's a myth that we don't receive big grants. But as someone who did receive a big NEH grant 2 years ago for a project on the Italian diaspora in the Appalachian region, it was really gratifying to know that historically we have received these kinds of important and history-making grants. When I saw that Dominic got a grant in 1979 and for how much it was, I almost fell on the floor because today it would be the equivalent of $1 million grant. And I went, why don't we talk about this? and we must continue to work toward achieving this kind of funding to support the work we do, since grants help to make our work both discoverable and accessible to a larger public. When I was in graduate school, a professor once said to me, "You see the patterns in the rug, Nancy." I hadn't realized that not everyone can do that or wants to do that. It's part of my DNA. I like watching the weave and weft of a fabric, in this case of a writing tradition. I like bringing the different threads of our tradition together in conversation and watching what might emerge as part of the rug or veer off into a new complementary rug. For today, I'm thrilled to bring 2 writers who teach in, write in, and make their homes in Chicago. The Italian American literary tradition is young. It is especially young for Italian American women writers like Christina Marrocco and me, and Italian American writers who work in speculative fiction, science fiction, or horror like Mark DiPaolo. I'm honored to be here and to have Mark and Christina join me today. So what I'd like to do is introduce the both of them, and then they're going to get up and they're going to read from their work for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A afterwards. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to introduce you first, Mark. Mark DiPaolo, a humanities professor at Moraine Valley Community College, is the author of Fake Italian, an 83% true autobiography with pseudonyms and some tall tales, published in 2021. He's also written academic books about environmentalist science fiction and political symbolism in superhero stories, as well as edited Unruly Catholics from Dante to Madonna, published in 2013. With his co-editor, Anthony Leoy, he has published Italian American Fantastico, which I already talked about, which came out with SUNY Press just this year. It's very exciting. Christina Marrocco is a Sicilian American author, poet, and professor. Her writing most often centers on working class issues and enclaves, Italian American life, and human grappling with themes of loss, grief, tenacity, and family and community dynamics. Her debut novel, which I've already talked about, Addio Love Monster, won Book of the Year from the Chicago Writers Association, and her second novel, The Way Beauty Comes Apart, was published in 2025. I believe there are copies over there, and it's earning high praise as well. Her poetry is widely published, and her dissertation focused on the Malocchio in Italian American literature. I believe is probably available in a library somewhere.
Be careful.
Christina has held workshops, and I believe she's doing one here in May, and spoken widely in the region on writing and on Italian American themes. She teaches creative writing, women's literature, and other courses at Elgin Community College, where she inspires others to apply their sensibilities and observations, cultural and otherwise, to writing. And she is the prose editor for the journal that I talked about, Ovunque Siamo, new Italian American writing. Please welcome Christina and Mark. And I'm going to sit down.
I get nervous, so I like to go first. Then I can relax and enjoy the next one. Do you want to, will you give me a shout out when
Yes.
I'm like at 12, 13
I
minutes?
certainly will.
So
I can
I'm
do
not
that.
Multitasking. Okay. My glasses on my head all the time. It's bad when I have my sunglasses on as well and they're tangled in my hair. Okay, before I start reading, I just did want to speak to the Casa Italia Writing Retreat series that we're beginning. I'll be leading that, and what that is a lovely 4 hours, including lunch, to come and get working on your own writing. So I'll be helping you to generate, giving some prompts, talking people through the process, answering any questions that you might have no matter where you are. So you could bring a piece that you have in process, and we could continue to work on it. You could come with nothing, and we could begin working on something. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's not an 8-hour day, but it's also not an hour where you're going to be in and out and not get anything done. So I guarantee you will leave with some writing under your belt and a lot of good community, a lot of great discussion. So I'm encouraging everyone to, put this on your calendars, and I would love to see you there and spread the word too. And to youngsters as well, because I think that's important that we get those voices included too. Okay, what else did I want to say to you? I also want to put in a plug for Ovunque Siamo. I was submitting a lot to them and getting poems published and short stories published before they published my book. It's a wonderful journal of new Italian American writing. It's a simple process to submit your work. And for writers, it's a great way to get your toes in the water and see what that feels like. Because there's nothing better than to craft something that then becomes part of the fabric of how we understand ourselves. It's not one voice as to what it is to be Italian American. It's all the voices taken together and then seeing what that pot creates. So I encourage you to submit there. If you have questions, you can always ask me. I'm now their prose editor. So after they published my books, Michelle said, "Hey, do you want to actually come over here and work for us for free?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure." So I've been doing that for a few now, and it's wonderful. Anything else I wanted to tell you before that? Okay, so I'm a pretty eclectic writer and reader, and because of that, and because I'm always promoting Italian American writers, they're not all I read everything, but I make sure that I read a wealth of Italian American writers. When I see an Italian name, I pick that book up. So I always want to say, here's what I'm reading, right? Just got this the other day. This is Joseph Fasano, and this is, I'm going to use this in a poetry workshop. He's put out a book to help people get started using prompts for poetry. Poetry is a great way to capture your memories. It's not always prose. A poem can say so much about your heart, about your experience. It's also a lot easier to work with because it's, well, easy as, but it's small enough that you can see it in a glance. And sometimes it's a great place for people to begin their writing experiences with poems. And then just handed in yesterday a review of this book for Franoi, and this is Expanding Diasporic Identity, a Multi-Directional Path to the New Italian Writer, and this is Anthony Julian Tambori. So you see these are at opposite ends of things, highly academic. This is a fun book. My books are somewhere in the middle of that because they're fiction, but support your Italian American writers, even if you're not an Italian American writer. Support your people, I think, out there in the writing world, because it isn't easy these days. All right. So I'm going to read to you. Now, has anybody read this book, and does anybody have a character they want to hear from? If not, I'm just going to go to my thing, but I'm always like taking requests. You have one? Okay. What's your favorite character?
Actually, I was very curious about the three, what's it, the...
Oh, the little guy? Yeah. All right, I got him for you. The three-legged stool.
Yes.
Always
So,
the naked.
I might not be able to read the whole story. How many pages is it? Maybe that's just what I'll do. Yeah, maybe I'll just try to do this story for you guys.
Go ahead.
All right, the three-legged stool. Big Enrico Salvatore La Mostra Secchione carried his stool like he carried his name, with great care, great pride, and great determination. He had decided earlier that week that he wouldn't need a ladder. No, a stool would be enough, even though he was not a tall man. So his three-legged stool pinned under his arm like an overgrown hen, Big Enrico made his way over the neighbors' cold front lawns on a dark spring night. It was important that he take a look inside the widow woman's house. We've got a peeping Tom on our hands, okay? Important that he make sure she was as good as he believed she might be before he set about courting her. Big Enrico was an old man. This he realized. And so he knew he had little time left in this world, none of it which he intended to spend with an inferior sort of woman. He's a piece of work, right?
Yes.
The truth was, and he said this to himself in the mirror back at his son's house even before he combed his sparse hair straight back, put on his quietest shoes, the brown leather ones from the city. The truth was, well, it was this. His Janetta had been the perfect wife for him. And so, of course, no one would compare. Now I've lost my place. What did I do? Here we go. She'd been serious and quiet and obedient. She'd been pretty early in life and handsome later. She'd been nice and clean, and not just clean. She kept his shoes shined and his undershirts ironed and folded, and it didn't end there. She'd gone to church every single day to pray for his soul because he never went. She'd given him time to listen to the opera as loud as he liked and to sing along, which he did while she was at church. And most importantly, she had been a good mother to his children. As he made his way, Big Enrico wondered what the widow woman wore to bed. And he aimed to find out. Janetta had always worn a white cotton gown with lace at the cuffs and a tie at the neck, and never was there a spot of grease or a crumb of cookie on her white gown. Like an angel she'd been. In his mind, he conjured the sight of Janetta's thick silvery braid that had lain over one shoulder, her right, tied with black something or other. He'd never figured out exactly how that worked, and he sighed. She should have worn a halo all her days, and wings. If only Janetta could come back, then he'd not have to bother with this Millefiore woman. But since the kids had moved him out of the city and into this village, he'd become very aware that the woman 3 doors down was in need of a husband, and very aware that Janetta was gone forever. He thought maybe he would benefit from having a wife again. He was lonely, even in his son's house. Little Enrico had talked him into selling the old place on Taylor Street in the city. They'd gotten a good price and put all the money in the bank. Little Enrico had shown him the passbook many times. It had both of their names on it. Little Enrico kept it locked in a desk on the sleeping porch with other important papers. Sometimes Big Enrico asked if he could get the money out of the bank, buy his whole house back. But little Enrico always said no. A place like that is too much upkeep, Dad, and besides, someone else lives there now. Why would they give it up for you? And it's 1946. It's a new year, a new age. You can't live in the past. Little Enrico always talked to him in that martyr's voice, a voice the kid had picked up back in puberty, just when his mustache had come in like baby mouse fur, and he'd hidden himself away in his bedroom. Little Enrico was 50 now, but he still had that voice, a voice that made Big Enrico feel stupid and burdensome. And anyway, this is better. We can help you with everything. And you can be with the grandkids and not have to cook for yourself. So that was always how little Enrico finished the discussion. It was good, Big Enrico thought, to have such a son in so many ways. He was lucky to be included and looked after. But when little Enrico had to go on vacation to the lake house or needed to do big noisy work in the house with saws and drills, he sent Big Enrico to live with the other grown children for a few days. Big Enrico didn't like being uprooted like that. And he didn't understand why he wasn't invited to come on vacation to the lake house. or why little Enrico's wife wouldn't let him rearrange the furniture in the living room so it would fit better. It was also too much that he had been shoehorned out of his place in the city, but now he'd come to a place where he didn't quite fit. Big Enrico had been very quiet when he sneaked out of the house, tiptoeing, past the big bedroom that little Enrico and his bossy wife lived in, and the little pink bedroom of his 3 granddaughters, every single one of them snoring away. He'd set down his stool quietly, opened the front door quietly, made his way out, shutting it quietly behind him. Generally, he was more nervous in life and might be dropping or banging things as he went, but he'd thought about that in advance and given himself a glass of vino in the kitchen for fortification. The stuff they'd made together from the big purple grapes 2 years ago in Chicago. He'd smacked his lips quietly, thinking about how the grape man who came to the city was superior to the one who came to this village. City grapes were more robust, full of vitality. And that's not all, he thought. If you asked him, everything in the city was better. The roar of traffic, louder. The height of the buildings, towering. The houses, brick, not wood. Yes, the city was powerful. The city was a man. The village was a woman. Nice enough, but docile. He was quite struck by his metaphor. And he stood stock still a few minutes and let it spread through his mind, the stool waiting on the stoop to take up again. Yes, this village hung on to Chicago like a snail on the leaf of a succulent plant. And while it did not inspire him in any way, he had once been a teamster in the city of Chicago. He felt himself inflating on the cool lawn, and it was about time. Here he was with fortified brains and his solid city stool and his brown city chairs, city shoes, striding out of little Enrico's house in the dead of night. And smart to do so. He'd put on his flat wool cap before leaving because it kept his head dry from the mist, and also because it looked smart. Just the week before, the priest over at Holy Cross had told him, as if making a closed deal to a family friend, that the woman was a particularly good catch if he were interested in such things, and that she was the kind of woman, while very skilled and good, who might well turn evil if left to her own devices, like a tyrant queen. And so it would be a good fit for big Enrico Salvatore La Mostra Secchione if he were to marry the woman. And it would be good for the woman as well. In fact, it would be good for all of Mulberry Park and the surrounding villages of Forest Park, Maywood, Bellwood, Melrose Park, for the whole world. The priest made a good case. And in the silver-tongued way of priests who'd spent real time in Roma, he made big Enrico feel like he was getting a deal. Fare un fare per Dio. He thought he heard the priest say that. But he couldn't be sure. He needed hearing aids, and he had just not gotten them yet. Too expensive. It's just, repeated the priest in big Enrico's ear, that she needs a good husband to set things into their proper order and to get her back into the church. Father Crispello, his wire-rimmed glasses electric with candlelight in the front pew where he chatted with Enrico, had looked more pious even than the statue of St. Joseph, which is almost impossible. He'd put his palms together as if to pray, but blurted out, "That woman needs to put away her old ways." Big Enrico had stared as Father Crispello completed his holy hand movement, making the church of his palms, rolling his eyes heavenward to implore God to make it so. These village priests were much more open than the city ones. But in the end, Father Crispello had made big Enrico feel important, a tool in the hands of an almighty, if distant God. This pleased him greatly, but it also made him uneasy, a little sick to his stomach. What exactly was wrong with this woman's soul? He wanted details. You wouldn't buy a mule, he told himself, without a good look at its teeth, priest or no priest. Big Enrico had seen her in the neighborhood, sure enough. She was handsome and sturdy with a broad face that seemed carved from marble. She was old like himself, but not at all frail. Also like himself, her hair was white and thick, and her skin was a sort of golden olive color. That was all satisfactory. though he felt she had no fashion sense, and often had mud smears on her thighs where she'd wiped her dirty hands, probably in the garden. But, he supposed, that was expected outside of the city proper. He could help her with that. Among other things, lots of things, Big Enrico felt a sense of excitement suddenly, like a young man, as if there were an unknown future again. He wondered again what she wore to bed. The pear trees in all the front gardens, including hers, sighed in the night air as he passed them, their arms raised to the sky, as is the habit of pear trees. The avenue was quiet. It was well after midnight. No lights were on in the houses, but the half moon lit his way over the lawn. Dew dampened his toes, even through his good shoes. But that only made Big Enrico feel more alive. He forgot the pain in his knees from the years of laboring and driving, forgot the curve in his spine as well. A cat's yellow eye glinted his way as it slunk across the street, stopping to watch him at intervals. Accusingly, he thought. He waved his arms, but he stopped short of shouting at it so as not to blow his cover. It stared some more. Big Enrico shook his stool in rage, and finally, thank God, the cat left him. Big Enrico knew he was in the right. He was sensible in how he felt about cats. They were known evildoers, sneaky like snakes. He started moving again, looking down the street to make certain the cat had completely gone. The south side of her house was his best bet. He paused to admire the concrete foundation. Solid. 2 windows faced him, one to the parlor and one to what might be a bedroom. He set his stool on the lawn before the parlor window, rooting its 3 legs back and forth to get a good hold so he wouldn't tip. He stepped up, grabbing the wooden rim of the window to raise himself. The asphalt shingle siding rasped his trousers as he pulled himself up. He hoped it wouldn't mar the fabric. They were his favorites. Big Enrico was not big, he was small. In fact, little Enrico was much larger than him, as were all his children and their wives. It wasn't his fault. Big Enrico had not always had food as a child. This, he felt, was the reason for his slight structure. But what could he do? Nothing. His smallness is why, despite the stool, only the eyes of Big Enrico and the nose of Big Enrico rose above the bottom of the window. But that was enough. He looked. The moonlight shone into the parlor, and the teetering man could make out a few things clearly. There was furniture that looked large and dark and heavy, old, nothing weird, except a strange sort of shroud thrown over what might be a wooden box in the corner. There was no one up in this room, not her who lived alone and no visitors. It looked relatively normale, cozy even. He liked the balls of yarn and some embroidery hoops on the floor, though really she shouldn't leave things scattered like that. As his eyes adjusted to the dark, they became keener, and he spied not one, but 3 cups and a spoon littering the side table closest to the window. A little messy, but that could be adjusted. After all, a lonely woman has little purpose and might well forget to tidy up her cups. He felt quite benevolent and progressive in his attitude, advanced in his understanding of how women's minds worked. A modern man. How am I time-wise, too? I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to when he gets to her bedroom window. He eventually makes his way, because we don't want to... All right.
Whoever's waiting.
All right. He's pulled himself up there. When her eyes flew open, he knew she saw him right away, or really just his eyeballs, there in the window, and she fairly levitated from the bed, hair standing straight up like a cat's. To Big Enrico's delight, shock, and horror, the woman was entirely nude, and the covers fell away in one whoosh. Despite years of marriage and advanced age, Big Enrico had never seen in the flesh a naked woman head to toe, not covering herself. His Janetta had always worn that big white gown and lifted it modestly and strategically as needed. But here, in the half moonlight, came at him a brazen naked woman thumping her bare feet across the bedroom floor. She was still powerful in her limbs, and her breasts, though they seemed a bit longish in nature, were undeniably breasts, and they swung with surprising velocity as she reached for the statue on her dresser. Enrico didn't know what to do or say. He figured it would be best to just pronounce his love here and now rather than to launch into a long explanation or wait for her sons, And so he plainly and in his deepest voice said, "Signora Melfiore, will you marry me?" He said it right into the gap between the sash and sill at the precise moment the woman yanked wide open the mouth of the window to get a clear look at what kind of degenerate lurked outside her bedroom. She looked down onto the top of Big Enrico's flat cap and screeched. The screech was not what he'd expected, and it unsteadied poor Enrico so much that his cap flew off and his stool tilted and then fell away under his brown shoes. Clinging to the sill now, dangling, he kicked like a mule at that stool trying to right it, but he could not, though the toes of his brown shoes skimmed over it again and again. Terrified to let himself fall to the ground and maybe break a hip, he had little choice but to simply hang there as long as he could. Skip a little bit more. Asks, "Will you marry me, please?" the second time, but it comes out in a panting voice while he's hanging. His arms are about to give out. She lifts the Black Madonna high over her head, obviously meaning to brain him with it, but then she hesitated. She bent at the waist and stood the statue down beside herself on the floorboards. She didn't answer Big Enrico. Instead, she walked slowly towards him and calmly pried, one at a time, each of his thick, aching fingers from the white painted sill. He tumbled to the ground below. A cat caterwauled in the distance. And I will stop there. And I'll welcome questions afterwards, but whew.
My students just love his comeuppance.
Oh, yeah.
Only good.
Yes, for it.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark. Thanks for being here. I want to tell you about sometimes when I get a little low, I'm like, okay, I'm a little depressed. I want to watch a stand-up comedy special on Netflix, and oftentimes I don't know who all the comedians are until the names come up, and I've been noticing an increasing number of Italian names. And so this one fellow had this special, thank God for jokes, Mike Birbiglia, and I'm looking at him like, oh, but I said, oh, it's Mike Birbiglia, you know. And he comes out and he does his set, and he seems really Italian to me. He talks about going to Catholic school, he talks about his family a lot, lots of intimate stories. He has a sleep disorder, I have a sleep disorder. Like, I just felt very connected to him. He wants credit for being, you know, a straight white guy who's not a Nazi or a sex offender, so do I, you know. So, you know, but what's funny is, I don't remember if it was during the special or elsewhere, when approached about being Italian, like people would say things to him like, why do you say Mike Birbiglia? In Italy, it's Birbiglia. And he's so tired of hearing that, he goes, in America, you're annoying, you know. And so, and he's like, listen, I'm not a real Italian. I mean, my family's been here so many generations, I don't speak the language. I'm just, you know, I'm an Olive Garden Italian. And I'm like, and then I hear that, and I'm like, I have the same fears, you know. My mom grew up in the Enclave in Brooklyn, the classic Enclave from art films that I grew up with, or, you know, the Italian American literature, you know. She and her grandmothers made ravioli from scratch on Sunday after church. They all got together, the whole extended family, 4 billion cousins, you know, none of whom ever went to the doctor, which is why now there's 5 of them, you know. So it sounded really good, but of course, you know, we grew up in a semi-attached house on Staten Island in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and all of our other relatives were spread throughout Manhattan, and we would see them occasionally, once every few years, at like an extended family reunion, at which point some of my cousins would say to me things like, you know, she's the first cousin, she's the second cousin, she's the first cousin once removed, and I didn't know what any of that meant. So mom felt like her family was shrinking, and she was worried, like, I want to keep our culture alive, I want to still be Italian, and I'm raising my kids not in an enclave. Like, I want them to be real. And when her father died, she's like, why should I even celebrate Christmas anymore? Like, it's just, it's over, you know? And so I'm pretty young, like 8, and I'm like, I'll be Italian with you, Mom, and I'll be Catholic with you, and we'll celebrate Christmas, you know? And I just felt this, and I'm the older child. And so my younger brother's like, Italians? He's like, every time I read a newspaper letter to the editor, some guy's like, no such thing as climate change, and the only prejudice is black against white. Always an Italian guy. He's like, no, I don't want to preserve that culture. And I'll be like, well, I do. And I just didn't know how to do it. And because, you know, I sometimes didn't feel real. As much as I was committed, I was like, Mom would show me Fellini movies. She'd show us the genealogy chart and say, I've traced our family back to Armento and Salerno and Napoli. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great, we should go. And she's like, well, the plane tickets are expensive. And I was like, okay. And I didn't speak the language, and I took 8 years of classroom Italian, and I can like order a table for 4, you know, like, and so, you know, and so obviously like it's something that, well, but the big one of course was, by the time I went to a public school with other Italian kids, because of where I grew up, I had been so living amongst other groups that I'm sitting in the school bus reading Jaws, because I love that movie and wanted to be Chief Brody. And the Italian guys at the back of the bus kind of come up in the neck, and they're like, well, reading, you know, so you English major, what are you? Yeah, typical Jewish guy, typical gay guy over here. And I'm like, oh, I'm a straight Italian guy. I'm like, no, you're not. You're reading Jaws. And I'm like, it's about a shark that eats people. Like, it's not like calculus. It's like, you know, and there's sex in here. And I was like, oh, so you're a pervert. I was like, well, I can't win. I just can't win, you know. And you know, I did have this sense of humor because I watched Marx Brothers movies and Bill Murray movies, and I liked humor a lot. And I tried jokes with my relatives, and you know, it wouldn't go super great because a lot of them didn't have a sense of humor. So for example, my Aunt Ro, I loved her, but she was a little humorless. And she was very loud. She looked like Ursula the Sea Witch in The Little Mermaid, if you've seen it. And she would just curse a lot and be really honest. So for example, there's one meal, we'll put the pastries out, and they're like, and Ro, you're gonna have this pastry. And one of the pastries had blue icing. And she went, what's that shit on it? You know, because it was blue. And I'm 8, I'm like, it's funny. And my mom made the mistake of telling Aunt Ro that I found her funny. And so the next time something like that happened, you know, I giggled, and she looked at me, and she's like, how am I funny? And suddenly I was in Goodfellas, and I was just like, it's not insulting, I just think you're funny, you know. And she's like, I've never found anything funny. And you know, they like the Mets and the Jets, and I'd be like, have you seen Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan? And it's, Spock died saving the Enterprise. And my cousin's like, what's the Enterprise, you know? And her husband's like, Jesus, I don't watch Star Trek, but I know what the Enterprise is, you know? And so I was just like, do I belong here? Like, I just feel really, so, you know, I wrote this memoir during COVID when I thought I was gonna die because I'm chubby and have a CPAP. Fake Italian, right? Because I'm fake, you know, and I've got nice big bold letters, I'm not real, you know? And so, I don't know if it's filtered in yet, but the idea of being invited to an Italian Cultural Center as a Chicago Italian writer, I'm like, really? Like, my inner 5-year-old is like, I count, I'm a real boy, you know. So, yeah, you know. So, and, you know, and I would write these short stories because Mom would show us all these great things about family. And well, not only would we do the Italian families, but she'd be like, okay, well, here's a Japanese director, Ozu, he makes movies about families. Or here's Mike Lee, who makes movies about families in England. And here's, we like Little House on the Prairie, because it's about families. Like, we just look families everywhere. Lots of autobiographical stuff, autobiographical graphic novels. And I had the usual axis to grind that a lot of Italians have. Although I would complain to the wrong people. I would say stuff like, oh man, I'm not a gangster. My family doesn't own a deli, I don't know what to do. And I would always be talking to people like, my family's had a deli for 3 generations, what the hell's your problem? I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, and I love delis, I really do. And then my friend Pete's like, oh, my brother's a gangster. So, but still, when I saw this poster, coming soon, The Sopranos, family redefined. I was like, oh no, that's gonna be the greatest show ever made, and it's never gonna go away. And so I decided, like, I just wanted to tell family stories. But I knew I would make it funny, and my family doesn't have a sense of humor. And you're not supposed to tell secret stories about your family members.
You're in trouble.
So I was like, let me publish under an assumed name. I'll be Damien Cavalieri. And it's gonna be a novel, it's not gonna be a memoir. And once I started it, I was like, oh, this is fictional. I was completely honest. I made myself kind of reprehensible, everything wrong with all the relatives, but also always meant to be sort of affectionate too. And you know, I was like, this is my lovable relative who is just wonderful in every way, shape, or form, and tells racist jokes, which is interesting. You know, but then of course I would have this. I had this saintly aunt who would go around putting holy water on people at the family reunions. It was blessed, the seawater that was blessed by the priest, and she was just the cutest person. And she was friends with everybody in her apartment building, no matter their race or sexual orientation. And I was like, that is a Catholic, you know. I want to be like Aunt Doris when I grow up. I want to bless everyone and have dinner with everyone, and that's what it means to be